He saved a girl from the cold streets, unaware she was the widow of a billionaire rancher. Elijah Cooper didn't believe in fate. 15 years in the military and 3 tours in Afghanistan had beaten any sense of destiny out of him. What remained was a man of 42 who preferred the company of the Wyoming wilderness to that of people. The January storm howling outside his cabin only reinforced his desire for isolation. He poked at the dying embers in the wood stove, the only source of heat in the small cabin he'd purchased after his discharge. The property, 20 acres of mostly untamed land with a dilapidated barn and this barely habitable structure, was all he could afford after his military pension and savings were stretched thin. He didn't need much, just enough space to keep the nightmares at bay and the memories locked down tight. The radio crackled with static before the emergency broadcast system cut in. Severe blizzard conditions continue throughout Carbon County. Temperatures expected to drop to -20 overnight. All residents advised to remain indoors. Elijah grunted and reached for the bottle of whiskey on the table. The amber liquid promised temporary reprieve from the phantom pain in his left leg, the titanium rod that had replaced bone after an IED explosion a perpetual reminder of his past life. The distinctive sound of his generator sputtering made him curse. If it died, the temperature in the cabin would plummet faster than he could gather wood for the stove. He reluctantly pulled on his heavy coat, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit him like a physical blow, snow driving horizontally into his face as he fought his way toward the generator housed in a small shed. The beam of his flashlight caught something unexpected, tracks in the snow, partially filled but recent enough to be visible. His military training kicked in immediately, instincts rising to the surface as he changed direction to follow them. In these conditions, anyone foolish enough to be outside would be dead within hours. The tracks led toward his barn, and as he pulled open the heavy wooden door, his flashlight illuminated a figure huddled in the corner amid bales of hay. A woman, he realized with surprise, her dark hair matted with snow, her thin jacket offering little protection against the deadly cold. "Hey," he called gruffly. "You can't stay here. You'll freeze to death." The woman's head jerked up, her eyes wide with fear rather than relief. She pressed herself further into the corner, her body trembling violently. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elijah said, moderating his tone. "But you will die if you stay in this barn." She shook her head, her lips blue from cold. "Please, just let me stay until morning. I'll be gone before you wake up." Her voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, Spanish, maybe. Elijah sighed, already regretting his next words. "Look, there's a blizzard. The temperature's dropping below zero. I've got a cabin with heat. You can stay there tonight, leave whenever you want tomorrow." The woman hesitated, weighing certain death against trusting a stranger. Finally, she nodded, trying to stand but stumbling as her frozen limbs failed her. Without asking permission, Elijah stepped forward and lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, and she flinched at his touch before surrendering to necessity. Inside the cabin, he set her down near the wood stove, adding logs until the fire blazed. He handed her a blanket, which she wrapped around herself with shaking hands. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes darting around the cabin, noting exits, assessing threats. Elijah recognized the behavior. He'd seen it in refugees, in soldiers, in anyone who'd learned the hard way that safety was temporary. "You got a name?" he asked, pouring coffee into a chipped mug and adding a splash of whiskey. "Sophia," she replied after a pause that suggested she might have considered lying. "Sophia Reyes." "Elijah Cooper." He handed her the steaming mug. "Drink this. It'll warm you up." As color slowly returned to her cheeks, Elijah noticed details he'd missed before, the fine quality of her worn clothes, a small scar that traced her jawline, the way she held herself with a dignity at odds with her circumstances. "What were you doing out in this weather?" he asked, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. Sophia's fingers tightened around the mug. "Running," she admitted softly. "The man who drove me here, he wasn't who he claimed to be." Elijah nodded, not pressing for more information. He understood running, understood the need to escape one's past. "There's a spare room through that door," he said, pointing. "Lock's broken, but I'll sleep out here. You're safe for tonight." For the first time, Sophia met his gaze directly. Her eyes were dark, haunted by shadows that Elijah recognized all too well. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Wouldn't leave a dog out in this weather, let alone a person." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "Most people these days, they don't stop to help strangers." "I'm not most people," Elijah replied, turning away to hide the memories her words had stirred. "Get some rest. Storm might let up by morning." As Sophia disappeared into the spare room, Elijah poured himself another drink and settled into the worn armchair facing the door, his old service pistol within reach. He didn't know who or what had driven this woman to seek shelter in his barn during a blizzard, but he recognized desperation when he saw it. And despite his best efforts to remain uninvolved in the problems of others, he found himself wondering what Sophia Reyes was running from, and whether it might follow her to his doorstep. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness that followed major storms. Elijah woke with a start, his hand automatically reaching for his weapon before he remembered his unexpected guest. The scent of coffee filled the cabin, coffee he hadn't made. Sophia stood by his ancient stovetop, 2 mugs in hand. She'd found his spare flannel shirt, which hung loosely on her frame, and had tied her dark hair back with what looked like a shoelace. "Hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the coffee. "Seemed the least I could do." Elijah grunted in acknowledgement, accepting the mug she offered. The coffee was stronger than he usually made it, but better. "You're up early." "Old habits." Sophia looked toward the window where sunlight glinted off snowdrifts nearly 4 feet high. "I should get going." "Going where?" Elijah asked before he could stop himself. "Town's 15 miles away, roads won't be cleared for hours." Sophia's shoulders tensed. "I need to keep moving." "From what?" The question hung between them. Sophia took a slow sip of coffee, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "My name isn't just Sophia Reyes," she finally said. "It's Sophia Valmont Reyes." Elijah's eyebrow raised slightly. Even in his self-imposed isolation, he recognized the name Valmont. The family owned half the cattle operations in Wyoming. "Richard Valmont's widow," she continued. "Though according to the newspapers, I'm the embezzler who disappeared with millions after his death." "Did you?" Elijah asked bluntly. Sophia's laugh held no humor. "No. But Richard's brother, Curtis, has powerful friends and control of the family lawyers. He needed me gone to take full control of Valmont Ranch." She touched the scar along her jawline unconsciously. When accusations weren't enough, he tried more direct methods. Elijah remained silent, letting her continue. "Richard left me 49% of Valmont Ranch operations. Curtis has 51%, but there's a clause in the will, if either of us is convicted of a felony, their shares revert to the other." She set down her mug. 3 months after Richard's funeral, financial irregularities appeared in accounts I oversaw. Then evidence of offshore transfers in my name. Then my assistant disappeared after leaving a suicide note confessing we were lovers plotting to steal from the company. "But you got away," Elijah observed. Sophia nodded grimly. "I took what evidence I could gather proving Curtis's involvement. I've been moving from town to town since then. The man who drove me here recognized me from the news. He called someone, probably hoping for the reward Curtis is offering." Elijah processed this information, years of military intelligence training making him search for inconsistencies. He found none in her eyes or voice. "These people who are after you," he said slowly. "They're not going to stop, are they?" "No," Sophia whispered. "They're not." Elijah stared out the window at his property, covered in pristine snow. He'd chosen this place to escape, to hide from his own demons. Now this woman had brought hers to his doorstep. "You can stay," he said finally. "Until the road's clear. Then I'll help you get wherever you're going next." Sophia studied him with wary hope. "Why would you risk that?" Elijah didn't have a good answer, just the memory of another time, another country, when he'd failed to protect those who needed him. He changed the subject instead. "You any good with farm work?" "I grew up on a ranch in New Mexico before I married Richard," she replied. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "Good," Elijah said, standing. "Because if you're staying, you're helping. First job is digging out that generator before we lose power again." As they worked side by side in the snow that day, Elijah realized it had been years since he'd spoken so many words to another person. Years since he'd shared his space. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt strangely like remembering how to breathe after holding his breath for too long. 3 weeks passed with no sign of Sophia's pursuers. The roads had cleared days ago, but neither of them mentioned her leaving. They fell into an uneasy rhythm, Elijah working to repair the barn roof before spring rains came, Sophia taking over the cooking and helping with daily chores. One evening, returning from checking his property boundary, Elijah found Sophia in the barn, expertly treating his old mare's infected hoof. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "My father was a veterinarian before he lost his practice," Sophia replied, gently wrapping the horse's leg. "I helped him until I was 18. "What happened then?" Sophia straightened, brushing hay from her jeans. "I met Richard at a rodeo where I was competing. He was there scouting horses for Valmont Ranch." A sad smile crossed her face. "He was 20 years older but kind. Offered me a job as a trainer first. Romance came later." "You loved him," Elijah observed. "I did." Sophia patted the mare's neck. "He wasn't perfect, but he treated me with respect. When he got sick, we both knew Curtis would try to push me out. Richard changed his will, gave me those shares to ensure I'd have protection." She shook her head. "He underestimated his brother's greed." Later that night, over a dinner of venison stew Elijah had prepared from his hunting stores, Sophia asked the question he'd been avoiding. "You never talk about your time in the military. The medals in your dresser drawer, I saw them when I was putting away laundry, suggest it was significant." Elijah's hand tightened around his fork. "Nothing worth discussing. I told you my story," Sophia pressed gently. "Sometimes sharing the weight makes it lighter." Elijah was silent so long Sophia thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "Afghanistan. Special Forces. Last mission went sideways. My team was protecting a village that had provided intelligence on Taliban movements. We were ambushed. IED took my leg, killed 3 of my men." He stared into his bowl. "The villagers were slaughtered after we were evacuated. Men, women, children, people I'd promised would be safe." Sophia reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist. "You couldn't have prevented that. Doesn't change the fact that I survived and they didn't." The following day, Sophia found Elijah's truck keys and drove into town without telling him. When she returned, the truck bed was filled with lumber, seeds, and farming supplies. "What's all this?" Elijah demanded. "Investment in your farm," Sophia replied, handing him a receipt. "Paid from my personal account, one Curtis hasn't found. Small enough withdrawal not to raise flags. I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's rent," she countered. "If I'm staying, I want to contribute. This land has potential, Elijah. You just haven't had the resources to realize it." For the first time since she'd known him, surprise registered on Elijah's face. "Who said anything about staying?" Sophia busied herself unloading supplies. "I did. Just now." She paused, vulnerability showing through her determined expression. Unless you want me to leave. Elijah studied her for a long moment before picking up a bag of seed. Better get this stored in the shed before it rains. That night, a battered truck pulled up to Elijah's cabin. He reached for his gun until he recognized the driver, Tom Willis, his only neighbor within 5 miles, an elderly rancher who checked on him occasionally. Got visitors asking about a woman matching your guest's description, Tom said without preamble when Elijah opened the door. 2 men, city types with expensive boots. Flashing cash at the diner, saying she's wanted for questioning in some kind of fraud case. Elijah's expression remained neutral. Appreciate the heads up. Tom nodded. Whatever she's running from, I figure it's her business. Just thought you should know they're headed this way tomorrow. After Tom left, Elijah found Sophia in the barn, brushing the mare. They found me, she said quietly, reading his expression. I should leave tonight. Or, Elijah said slowly, we could make a stand. Dawn found Elijah and Sophia making preparations. They moved her few belongings to a hidden root cellar beneath the barn, then Elijah retrieved a metal case from under a floorboard in his bedroom. You have a plan? Sophia asked, watching him check the sight on his rifle. Strategy, he corrected. First rule of engagement, know your enemy better than they know you. He looked up at her. These men work for your brother-in-law. What motivates them, money or loyalty? Money, Sophia said without hesitation. Curtis inspires fear, not devotion. Elijah nodded. Then we use that. He handed her a prepaid cell phone. Call this number when I give the signal. It belongs to an old army buddy who works for the FBI in Cheyenne. Tell him exactly what I wrote down. By mid-morning, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled up Elijah's long driveway. 2 men emerged, one tall and lean, the other stocky with a military bearing. Both moved with the cautious precision of predators. Elijah stepped onto his porch, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. Can I help you, gentlemen? The taller man smiled without warmth. Hope so. Name's Reeves. This is Burke. We're looking for Sophia Valmont. Have reason to believe she might be in the area. Haven't seen any strangers around here, Elijah replied. What's she wanted for? Embezzlement, fraud, Reeves said smoothly. Family matter, really. Her brother-in-law just wants to talk to her, clear things up. Must be important, tracking her all this way. Burke stepped forward. Mind if we take a look around? Won't take long. Actually, I do mind, Elijah said pleasantly. Private property. Reeves's smile tightened. We can get a warrant. You do that, Elijah agreed. While you're at it, you can explain to the sheriff why you're carrying concealed weapons without permits in this county. He nodded toward the bulge visible under Reeves's jacket. Sheriff Wilson's real particular about that sort of thing. Burke and Reeves exchanged glances. Look, Burke said, we're authorized to offer a reward for information. 20,000, cash, right now. He patted his jacket pocket meaningfully. Tempting, Elijah admitted. But I'd need to know what happens to her if I did know something. Like I said, family matter, Reeves repeated. She'll be well taken care of. The way she got that scar on her jaw. Elijah asked innocently. Both men tensed. What did she tell you? Burke demanded. Enough to make me curious why Curtis Valmont didn't come himself, Elijah replied. And enough to make some calls to old friends who owe me favors. On cue, the sound of vehicles approaching made all 3 men turn. 2 sheriff's department SUVs rolled up the driveway, followed by an unmarked sedan. Elijah smiled. That'll be Agent Ramirez from the FBI. Served with him in Kandahar. He was very interested in the evidence Sophia's been gathering against Curtis Valmont. Something about witness tampering, fabricating evidence, attempted murder. Burke lunged for his weapon, but Elijah was faster, his rifle leveled at the man's chest. I wouldn't. Within minutes, both men were in handcuffs. Agent Ramirez, a stocky man with a serious expression, approached Elijah. Your message said this was urgent, he said. Your friend better have something substantial. She does, Elijah replied, then whistled sharply toward the barn. Sophia emerged moments later, clutching a weathered leather portfolio. Her eyes widened at the scene before her, but she walked forward with quiet dignity. Agent Ramirez, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. I believe this contains everything you'll need to open an investigation into Curtis Valmont. As the agents led Burke and Reeves away, Sophia turned to Elijah. You planned this all along? Since I arrived? Elijah shook his head. Since Tom warned us yesterday. Figured it was time to stop running and start fighting back. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for believing me. I know what it's like to carry ghosts, Elijah replied simply. Time we both laid them to rest. 1 year later, the property formerly known as Cooper Farm had transformed. New fencing enclosed expanded pastures where a small herd of horses grazed peacefully. The barn had been rebuilt, twice its original size, with a modern stable attached. The cabin remained, but beside it stood a larger structure, a simple but handsome ranch house with a wide porch. Elijah sat on the porch steps, watching a group of teenagers lead horses through grooming routines in the corral. Most of the kids were from broken homes or juvenile detention centers, part of the rehabilitation program Sophia had established with her restored fortune. The trial of Curtis Valmont had made national headlines. With Sophia's evidence and testimony from former employees who finally felt safe coming forward, he'd been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. Sophia had reclaimed her shares of Valmont Ranch, but instead of returning to her former life, she'd made a different choice. They're getting better, Sophia observed, settling beside Elijah on the steps. She handed him a mug of coffee, her wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight. Jason even managed to get Thunder to lift his hoof without a fight. Elijah nodded appreciatively. Kid's got a natural touch. Like his teacher, Sophia said with a smile, leaning against his shoulder. When the dust had settled after Curtis's arrest, Sophia had proposed a partnership. She would invest in transforming Elijah's struggling property into a working ranch that doubled as a sanctuary, for rescued horses, for troubled youth, and for veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. In return, Elijah would provide the expertise and daily management the ranch required. The partnership had evolved into something neither expected but both embraced with cautious hope. They'd married 6 months earlier in a simple ceremony beside the creek that ran through the property, attended only by the small community they'd built around them. Letter came today, Sophia said. The board approved our proposal. Starting next month, the Valmont Cooper Foundation will fund similar programs on 5 more ranches across the state. Elijah took her hand, his thumb tracing the scar that ran along her palm, a reminder of their first weeks working together, when she'd sliced it open helping him repair the barn roof. It matched the one on her jaw, both marks of her journey. Richard would be proud, he said quietly. Sophia nodded. Maybe. But this isn't about honoring his legacy anymore. It's about creating our own. They watched as one of the veterans who helped run the program, a woman who'd served in Iraq and returned with both physical and invisible wounds, demonstrated proper form to a teenager with a history of anger issues. The boy listened intently, his usual defiance replaced by focused attention. You know, Elijah said, when you showed up during that blizzard, I was convinced you'd bring nothing but trouble. Sophia laughed, the sound still relatively new but increasingly frequent. And was I trouble? The best kind, he admitted, a rare smile crossing his face. As evening approached, they moved inside to prepare dinner for their extended family of staff and program participants. The main house could seat 20 around the massive reclaimed wood table Sophia had commissioned from a local craftsman. Tonight, like most nights, every chair would be filled. Sophia paused in the doorway, looking back at the land that had offered her sanctuary when she most needed it. She thought of the frightened woman she'd been, huddled in Elijah's barn, certain her life was over. She couldn't have imagined then that what seemed like an ending would become the beginning of something so much richer than what she'd lost. "Coming?" Elijah asked, holding the door. Sophia nodded, taking his hand. "I'm home." Outside, the newly painted sign at the entrance to their property caught the last rays of sunlight. It read simply, "Second Chance Ranch, where healing begins." Below it, in smaller letters, "Founded by Sophia and Elijah Cooper, for all who need a new beginning." As night fell over the Wyoming landscape, lights glowed warm from every window of the ranch buildings. Within those walls, people who had once been lost, to violence, to addiction, to grief, found their way back to themselves and to each other. And at the center of it all stood two unlikely saviors who had learned that sometimes, the greatest rescue is allowing yourself to be saved.